I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm not sure that I even need the microphone, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Stuart Patrick. I'm a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and direct the program on international institutions and global governance. Among several things that we do is something called the Global Governance Monitor, which is the most comprehensive online effort to map and evaluate existing frameworks of international cooperation across a wide range of issue areas, ranging from nuclear non-proliferation, global finance, the fate of the world's oceans, climate change, global public health, efforts to restrict armed conflict, and soon we're going to be terrorism as well, and soon we're going to be having a component on human rights as well. It's a distinct honor to chair this session on the state of global governance, and especially to have two such wonderful panelists here. Sean Cleary, who is chairman, among other things, is chairman of Strategic Concepts and a distinguished former South African diplomat, has agreed to step in for Kishore Mahbubani, who had another appointment. And we're also delighted to have Bruno Lafont, chair and CEO of the Lafarge Group, and which, in addition to being one of the sponsors of the World Policy Conference, he obviously has a wealth of experience, particularly in the economic realm. We have about 2 hours. We may not go 2 hours, depending on how the conversation goes and how successful we are in addressing this issue. But what I'd like to do, as taking the chair's prerogative, is to take several minutes and offer some framing comments. And then I'd ask my two panelists to perhaps offer their own remarks of 10 or 15 minutes apiece, and then I've got a number of questions that I'd like to engage them in with respect to specific aspects of global institutional reform, and then turn it over very much to you and have solicit your questions to any of us on the panel here. As Thierry said, mentioned yesterday in the opening session, the question of global governance and effective multilateral frameworks for dealing with global issues is obviously going to be one of the paramount challenges of the 21st century. Given the world's deepening interdependence, that interdependence has become clear is not only political and security, economic and ecological, but it's also increasingly moral as well. In the wake of the global financial crisis, we've obviously seen some adjustment in international monetary and financial matters, but in other realms, we see mostly inertia and stasis, despite ongoing challenges, risks, and vulnerabilities. Global governance is obviously, just a couple words on global governance. The term, it's obviously a slippery term, open to many competing definitions. In the United States, global governance, the phrase makes some people reach for their revolvers, and we do have a lot of revolvers in the United States. And the fact that I work at the Council on Foreign Relations and run a global governance program exposes me very frequently to some emails from conspiracy theorists, and some of them are quite colorful. My favorite is that, well, Dr. Patrick, I'm sure you're a smart and capable gentleman, but Beelzebub tried global governance at the Tower of Babel. It didn't work for him, and it's not going to work for you either. So many of my emails are scripturally informed. Be that as it may, the way I like to think of global governance is, and for the purposes of this session, I think we can think of it as the collective effort by states as well as non-state actors to address common challenges that transcend national boundaries. And it's an effort to create what I would think of as purposive order and permit collaboration in world politics in the absence, obviously, of world government. Now, obviously, governance at the global level is inherently more complex in a system, obviously, of sovereign states lacking overarching political authority. What we find is that governments are often cooperating horizontally to negotiate new norms and rules of behavior and to embed these in institutions. designed to provide public goods and to mitigate global bads. But in fact, most international organizations and frameworks of international cooperation lack the power to enforce compliance with collective decisions. In the absence of a global government, which I think most of us would shy away from in terms of wanting, governance is obviously a patchwork of institutional arrangements. A lot of these are obviously intergovernmental, and some of these are truly global arrangements, obviously the UN, the international financial institutions, the WTO, et cetera. But increasingly, as it was pointed out, particularly in the last session, we're seeing a regionalization of politics as well. So we find regional organizations like AU or ASEAN or others as increasingly as competitors as well as complements to universal fora. And that creates interesting dilemmas for global governance, the tension between the regional level and the global level. Also, given the frustrations that we have experienced with universal international institutions, there appears to, at least in my mind, to be a trend towards a la carte or informal aspects of multilateral cooperation that can coalesce around specific issue areas and specific tasks, as well as a greater use of standing consultative fora, whether we're talking about the G20 or the G8. But as Bruno mentioned yesterday, or actually perhaps it was this morning, in this morning's session, on corporate social responsibility, global governance is increasingly reaching beyond the state as corporations and civil society actors play an increasingly prominent role in defining the global agenda, establishing new norms, providing resources in many cases, and monitoring compliance with new rules. And one sees this in a lot of innovative public-private partnerships. Even, for instance, the Global Fund for AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria has the Gates Foundation as one of its leading members. But one can think of governance of the internet, for instance, or regulation of extractive industries. At the same time, the growing involvement of NGOs and the private sector can create questions of accountability and legitimacy that I think are important ones. I think that there's sometimes a default position that, well, including global civil society automatically means that things are getting more democratic. But I think that in terms of accountability, that's not always clear. What is clear is that the supply and especially the quality of global governance has not kept pace with the demand for effective multilateral arrangements. And there are at least two reasons why. The first, which has been a theme throughout the past couple of days, is that the transnational agenda driven by globalization and technological change is challenging both the sovereign state and international institutions.